Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca.
Welcome, friends. I am Cindy Thompson, and this is a Resilience Project. This is a space where stories are shared and possibilities are discovered. I invite you to partner with me in cultivating resilience among humans, one conversation at a time. With each guest, I am reminded of how unique each of our stories are. In this episode, I had the privilege of talking with my friend, Pam Botterill. Meeting Pam through a ladies' golf group, it was not until recently that I learned of her story of adoption, and I invited her to be here to share it with you as well. Pam has a master's in professional communication from Royal Roads University and has worked at Vancouver Island University for over 30 years. She is an Indigenous woman from the Wee-Wa-Kum Nation in Campbell River, was adopted at the age of 9 months, and was raised by a non-Indigenous family in Powell River. Pam describes her experience of adoption as a good news story, with an interesting connection between the Celtic music she was raised with and the drumming of her Indigenous roots. Pam talks about meeting her biological family as an adult and the value of community in her story of resilience. So Pam, I am so honored to have you here with us today to talk about a really important part of your lived experience and your story. And I think of it as two parts. You're going to share with us today about your adoption, and secondly, about surviving breast cancer.
Sure. So I always knew I was adopted. It was never like something, and I actually don't even remember being told. It's just something that I knew growing up. And I always knew I was adopted. I always knew my mother was Native, is how it was described to me. But it was always with stories attached to it. So my mom would share the story of how she traveled with her sister from Powell River, is where I grew up. And her sister traveled from Powell River to Port Alberni on Vancouver Island to pick me up. So they were all excited because my mom and dad had been trying to have children and were unsuccessful. So they had decided on going this route. So when they got the news, they hopped on the ferry and headed over, and we're all excited. And they get to the house. I believe I was in foster care is now how you learn more. So the home I was in, when my mom and her sister walked in, the woman looks at her and she says, you didn't bring Stan, who is my dad, her husband. And my mom panics, thinking, oh my God, it's that era. Like, if the man isn't here, I'm not going to be able to get this child. And then the woman says, oh, no. She said, I had raised Stan in foster care when he was about 13.
Wow.
So it was just this amazing, it's always been this amazing story that there's this long time connection. And I can't remember the name of the woman now, but I had heard it a number of times. And I did know our dad had shared with us that he had been in foster care and kind of passed around. And, it was just one of those stories that you hear. And so it's always been a celebration to be adopted. It was never hidden. Growing up in Powell River, we were a close family with other cousins that lived nearby that you were always with. And I always say how I was never described as adopted. So my sister, my mom later did have a child. My sister Jackie, she had 6 years later. She would never describe me as her adopted sister.
Lovely.
It strikes me because I hear that at times from other people when they're explaining who their siblings might be. I have this sister, and I have an adopted sister. And it strikes me because I just go, I would never be described that way by anyone, my cousins or anyone. It was just something that was known. And, as young kids, it was known, but you were never described that way. It wasn't your identity. It was more of celebration. And I think, when I'm older and I'm with friends and we were in Port Alberni, and my dad had a longtime friend of his that lived there, and we would go to visit. I says, let's stop in and see Jack and Donna. So we stop in, and she was just enamored because, of course, Jack, he's an old logger friend of my dad. So he's got this loud voice, and it's just like, oh, Pammy, you're here. And it's just like, again, I've always felt this celebration. And then he would share the story of the day that Pam arrived, because Lorraine and Charlotte had gone off to pick her up, and the guys were all out fishing, you know, because they didn't make the journey. Yeah. But it was like this celebration, which I guess similar to someone giving birth in a sense, but it was just, I arrived a different way.
I love that. It's just a celebration that you were arriving.
Yeah. And so for me, I never felt I needed to look for family, because I always felt connected to the family I was raised with. So I always find it interesting when other people that have been adopted feel this disconnect, they say, you know, like there's something missing. And for me, I just never had that feeling.
I love the part where you talk about your dad also was in the same foster home that you were adopted from. And what a really cool connection that foster mom was really hoping to see him and to see how he's doing and to have that connection as well.
Yeah, because she would have been on the mainland, you know, so she had obviously made a transition from the mainland to the island. So just that connection would be there. His story was very different, but ended up in the same place or with the same family. I mean, and I was 9 months old when they adopted me, so I wasn't a baby, but I think my mom said I was starting to walk by then. So the couple was quite attached to me. Yeah, it was interesting. And so I've always known I was adopted, but never, I guess, felt a disconnect. And I always knew I was part Native.
Yes.
So I never felt a need to search for this other part of myself, I guess. But I just kind of went with things as they would come up. So one of the other pivotal points would have been, it was around 1990, and I had a call that came from a government office asking if this was Pam Botterill, and they want to check for my address. And I think they identified as Indian Affairs because they had something to send me. I remember the woman was kind of uncomfortable, and she goes, oh, well, it's a check, so we want to make sure we're sending it to the right address. So as I recall, it was for Native kids that had been adopted out to non-Native families. Because I always thought I was from a band in Port Alberni, because that's where my mom had come to get me. So she must have said something about Campbell River is the band I was with. So I went, well, Campbell River? I thought I was from Port Alberni. And she just didn't want to talk to me at all. Like, she couldn't get off the phone quick enough.
Interesting.
She just wanted to know that this was the right address, and off the phone she got. And I waited, and I think I got a check. I don't know. I think it was like for $1,000 or $2,000. And it might have been some early type of settlement around the 60s scoop where Indigenous kids were removed. Yeah. So then that led me on a journey of connecting with the Campbell River Band. We Way Come is their name now. And Clarence and I were on our way to Port Hardy to go on a kayak trip. So we stopped in at the band on the way up just to see what I would be able to find out. And there's a social worker there. And so I say kind of who I am, and I understand that I'm registered. I'm from here. Don't know who registered me, but I'm with the band. So other friends of colleagues and social workers have told me, like, that person would have known who my mother was, but said they couldn't tell me. But she said somebody else in the band could tell me. So she organized to have a woman that works with the elders to come and meet me and take me around the reserve to various homes to see if anyone remembers who would have had a child around the time I was born. And if someone in the nation remembered who my mother was, they could tell me, but she couldn't. So I go in the car with this woman, and we go on the reserve, and the first home we actually go to, I find out later, was my grandmother's home. And we walk in the house, and there's a few people there, and everyone's like, oh, hello, hello. And then the woman has to go, you don't know Pam. This is Pam. And her mom would have been around the age of, I'll say Cindy and Sally. And, do you remember anyone having a child around that time? Nobody remembered anything. So we went to 2 other homes, similar result. No one remembered. So then when we get back to the band office, the woman says, oh, well, sorry about that, but I can give you your status card if you want. So that's how I ended up getting my status card. And then from that, the adoption laws opened up. You paid $50. And as long as the parent didn't say they didn't want to be connected, I got what they called a detailed birth certificate that was sent back to me. So that's then how I found out my mom's name was Lucy Cliff. So she was from the Cliff family in Campbell River, never named a father, and said there was one other child prior to me. So I assumed I was the second child that was born. Didn't really do much more. I was connected to the nation, so I tried to start going to different meetings that might be happening. And people were really good at introducing me to, oh, you're from the Cliff. Like, oh my God, you're related to like everyone, because my grandmother was Eleanor Cliff and her husband was Moses. And Eleanor, I found out, was one of 5 sisters. So they had kind of married into whether it's Cliffs or Hendersons or Drakes, or like I'm related to everyone, as this one woman described it. So I would try to go to meetings. The next part where I started thinking about sharing my story, I was working at VIU, and there were a number of speakers there. Duncan McHugh was the host.
Okay.
And the chief at the time was Doug White, and he was there. And I think Wab Canoe was even on the stage. And they were talking about different things, but the main piece I remember, Wab Canoe that said it, that more people need to share their stories. And he said even the good stories. And that always stuck with me, because I feel, sadly, there's so many tragic stories out there of adoption and
yes,
and what's happened, whether it's around residential schools. So I went, okay, well, maybe I need to start sharing my story, because it's a good story. And in the end, I eventually did meet my mom. She's passed just 2 years ago now, but I probably met her 3 or 4 years ago. First, I met one of my brothers because there was a project happening at VIU where they were carving totem poles, and he was one of the helpers up there. One of our elders on campus knew that Lucy was my mom, and he knew that the one boy that had come up would be my brother. So someone brought him up and introduced me from my office, said, oh, I have someone to meet you. And so he kind of came up and comes in. It's kind of awkward.
I bet.
I was like, oh, hello, nice to meet you. And so he stayed connected, and then more of his siblings. So he's one of 3 children. So there's him and his brother Dave, and then he has a sister, Gina. So they all started to reach out to me and say, because they knew nothing about me.
Yeah.
And they stayed connected. And I said, well, I'd like to meet Lucy. And they say, well, they take her out sometimes for breakfast because she's getting older. So they called, I'll never forget, it was Remembrance Day. And they were coming back from Vancouver. They'd been at one of the big house celebrations in Vancouver, drumming and that. So they said, oh, we're going to meet Lucy at Alice's if you want to meet us there at 10 o'clock. So I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. Okay. So I go over and I'm waiting at a booth because I don't see anyone. And then finally someone says, oh, well, there's some people around the corner, because Alice's is quite a long restaurant, and then you can go around. And I guess they come in the back because Lucy was in a wheelchair, had trouble walking. So I go around the corner, and it was Dave and his wife, Deanna, and they had Lucy sitting there, and then his other brother and his wife, and then Gina was there with her boyfriend and another couple. Like, there was about 8 people there.
Wow.
Just, whoa, this is not, I thought it was just going to be Lucy and maybe one of the brothers. So,
but what was that like for you to walk in and see so much of your family there excited to meet you?
Yeah, it was comforting because they were so open and welcoming. Like, they had a little gift bag for me. And I think it had a picture of Lucy with their father, Dave, who had passed. And it was an older picture, but a picture of them and another little gift in it. And I was like, so thoughtful. In the end, like, Lucy didn't say much. She was very quiet. You know, I just wanted to meet her to let her know that I was okay. Like, my life was good. And she whispered something to Dave. And then I said, oh, well, what did she say? And then he said, oh, she said she never saw you.
Oh.
Sad in some sense. But so I was glad I kind of reached out. So I found out later that I'm not the second child. She actually had another child in between. So the oldest is a boy, Robert, and he was adopted and grew up in Port Hardy. And then she had another daughter, Linda, and Linda was raised by the grandparents. There's only like a year between Linda and I. So she obviously didn't want anyone to know because nobody knew about me. So I think that was the intriguing part for them, because then I find out, coming from growing up in Powell River with me and my sister, to now I'm one of 10 children that Lucy had. She was married twice. She had 4 children with her first husband, and I've met 3 of them. And then she left him and met Dave and then had 3 more children.
What was that like for you, Pam, to discover for so many years, thinking of just yourself and your sister and your little nuclear family, if you will, and then suddenly discovering you have all of this larger extended family out there?
Yeah, it was overwhelming a bit at first. I didn't know what to expect, I think, was the bigger challenge.
How could you?
Are they going to want something from me? But then when I meet them, it's just out of curiosity and still wanting to be connected, and which is easier in this day and age. It's a challenge with the COVID we're going through right now. But, you know, I'll get a text message from Dave, just, how are you?
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, that's so nice. And Gina, over the holidays, we texted back and forth. And, you know, I find out she's a beautiful weaver or knitter of the Cowichan sweaters that you see. And she sent me pictures of her and her kids and grandkids that she has. And so just, feeling connected and, you know, hoping at some point after this COVID is out is finding a way to maybe get the families to meet, have these siblings that I have meet my sister and my other cousins in Powell River. Yeah, it would just be interesting to share that experience with them, right?
Yes. Well, and when you first told me the story of going to that restaurant and having so many people there to greet you, it truly reminded me of your initial story of coming back home to Powell River and the community being so excited about having you come home and your arrival, and then seeing your biological family and siblings there at that restaurant. It was like another homecoming for you.
Yeah. And they've been very inclusive. The protocol is they can do a major celebration of someone who's passed after they've been gone for 5 years. So they had been working on a major celebration of their dad and asked for permission from the band to then include Lucy, because she passed just before this celebration was going to happen.
I see.
So that they could also acknowledge her as part of that. And it was held in the big house, and they reached out and asked to make sure that I come. They would have spent years preparing for it because there's songs and gifts that are done. It's held in the big house. Yeah, it was an honor. I mean, I went at 5 and I left at 11. It wasn't over yet, but I was like, I gotta go, you know. So you've got the fire going, and so just open and willing to share and feeling a connection, which I honor in some sense, that someone that doesn't know you at all still wants to know you and wants to reach out.
Your family to them. Yeah. And Pam, one of the questions that came to mind for me, just working in this field and working with folks who are First Nations. What I understand is it's important for them to identify where they're from. Like when somebody says, where are you from? It is like, what nation are you from? What community? Mm-hmm. And so as you've learned about your roots and your heritage there, what's that like for you to maybe have learned about the First Nations background, your family background, and how would you answer that now?
Yeah, well, I've had the opportunity, and a part of it is because of where I work now at VIU in the Office of now Indigenous Education and Engagement, being involved in various events, having access to elders. I've now had the opportunity and been able to practice where I say, I'm Pam Botterill and I'm from the Wee-Wacom Nation, and my mother is the late Lucy Cliff, and my grandmother was the late Eleanor and Moses Cliff. That is the protocol for how you introduce yourself, is you explain who your family is. And we had an event at VIU with some faculty there that we had gone through months of a course that was called Learning How to Be Together, and then had a mini little ceremony, I guess. And so it was very emotional the first time I did that, because I also wanted to acknowledge my adopted family. So I would acknowledge my Indigenous family, but also wanted to acknowledge Lorraine and Stan Botterill, who raised me, and Frida and Dan McMaster, my grandparents on that side as well, because that is who I am. Like, it's not just the biological part of who you are, which has always been interesting and intriguing because of the Indigenous side of it, right? And the different types of culture. And as we as a community become more aware of what that is interesting. But I also don't want to lose how I was raised. Like my grandfather on that side, being a McMaster and from Cape Breton Island, and fiddlers and who you're connected to on that piece. I think at times there's still that grounding and connection to music and family. Is what I found was similar when I started connecting and learning about my Indigenous side, because that is also about the drumming and the singing and the sharing of music is how it's happened. And that's kind of how I was raised, but it was just different music.
Yes.
But just the value in family and being connected didn't change.
Yeah. And I love how you've pulled out the way that music played a part, but you've mentioned connection a number of times. And it seems to me that's really important in your story of where you felt you belonged, no matter whether it was your adoptive family or your biological roots. You felt like you had a connection and they welcomed you regardless. And that sounds like a theme of resilience as I hear it.
Yeah, totally. And that's where when I say, sharing the good stories, because there's so many stories out there where children had terrible experiences in being in places and that disconnection and not being welcome. So, I feel thankful and lucky that I had the experience that I had.
Yeah. And it's a really important piece that you're mentioning. I love that we sometimes have a good story, but within that, there are key ingredients that helped us to feel resilient, to feel strong, and that love and connection you felt, even being adopted at 9 months. No matter where you were, you felt like you belonged. And I just really want to pull that piece out. So your adoptive parents, did they learn of your connection with your biological family?
My mom was ill around the time it started to happen. She ended up with MS and passed in 96. But there was a time where I would ask, and she would encourage me to find things out. And same with my dad. I mean, he never got to meet, but for him, in the end, he also was Indigenous. But his mother would never admit it because of the racism she grew up with. As my mom would say, Granny would always say she was Hawaiian. My mom would go, the first Hawaiian I ever met from Alert Bay, she'd go. And so, not that Granny was from Alert Bay, but she's not Hawaiian, right? But she would weave these stories. And it wasn't until much later she would actually start to admit that she was, but she would never go to the point of documenting it. So my dad would have been half Native because his father, the Botterill side, was white. She would never admit it. She never had a birth certificate. I think Dad could find something from where she was from. I think it was up around 100 Mile House is where she was. But, you know, it wasn't documented as much at that time. So.
And how sad that she couldn't celebrate that.
Yeah. And for him, you know, he kind of had that connection. So he was open and willing for whatever. But yeah, he is also since passed. So you don't get to meet that. But.
And because there wasn't the secrecy, like they openly shared that with you as you grew, that you had been adopted. So there wasn't this sort of elephant in the living room that nobody's talking about, or this weight of that. And I hear that left it open for conversation, even as adults, as you then started to explore that more.
Yeah.
So Pam, can we pivot a little bit and speak a little bit about your survival of breast cancer as well? Because I think about some of the challenges that would have brought for you when discovering that you needed to have treatment for breast cancer. And would you mind sharing, you know, what that was like for you a little bit and what got you through that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's always the word you never want to hear. And it came up through a routine mammogram that you go in. And in the end, it was cancer. And I remember you get the report. You're trying to read it yourself before you meet with the oncologist. And it described the cancer as a triple negative. When it's triple negative, all the other options of treatment don't work. So for it, the only options I had was the surgery to remove it, and then chemotherapy and radiation. I don't know. I just kind of put my head down and I went, okay, let's just get through this and see what we need to do. So they talked about things like chemo brain, that you could just not remember things. So they recommended writing down like all your passwords, having a book to document, you know, when your appointments are and really how you react to different treatments. And someone might have even mentioned finding ways that you can still communicate to people, because you might not feel great all the time, but people want to still connect. So that's where I thought about doing a bit of a blog where I could just kind of share stories and write some stuff, and I can share whenever I feel like it, and then people can respond and still be connected. So I just went, okay, I'm just going to do this. And maybe it's from my sports background. I just listened to what the doctor said and tried to pay attention to my body and what it was going through. So I found the blog very helpful in that sense, right? In the sense of a way that people could still connect, because people didn't want to come over. Your autoimmune is at risk, so you don't really want, kind of like this COVID era, right? So you're cleaning everything, You're washing everything, you're not going out. I think the hardest part was when you start going through the chemo was losing my hair. So I had my hairdresser at the time kind of did me in stages, so he would kind of cut it shorter. But yeah, you'd be sitting there and I'd be able to pull like big gobs of hair out when it started getting bad. So then I'd go back to Miko and I'd say, okay, we just got to shave it off, like because it's all over the place. So that was the hard. And I think I had 2 different types of chemo because of what I was on. And the first one they called the Red Devil. And it actually was red, the liquid, when it was going in.
Well, just the name of the drug itself made me think it's not really the most encouraging name for a drug that's going to help you.
No, it isn't. There was another shot you could get that would help ease the bone pain potentially that could come. And so Clarence would give me that, and we had to go to a little session, and it was expensive, but it was almost like $1,000 a shot, and I had to have 8 of them.
Wow.
And they did give you nausea pills to make sure you don't get really sick. And that the nurses were really good, and they would stress that to take the nausea pill before you really felt too sick. Because the biggest concern they had was if I was to get sick to the point where you're throwing up and getting dehydrated.
I see.
That was their concern.
Oh, it almost sounds like there was comfort in knowing what to expect once you got into the rhythm of it.
Yeah, that's what I found. There was a routine, and I just kind of went through it, what I had to do. But I think the worst I felt, and Clarence shared later, not at the time, of course, that when I was going in for my last shot, my last chemo, I really didn't look good. And I didn't feel good. That, I think, and the worst for me, that was around the time I also lost my eyebrows.
Oh.
So kind of before that, because you're losing all your hair, right? Before that, you could kind of wear a toque, and it was winter time, so I almost felt, it's cold, I got a toque on. No one knows if I have short hair
Yes.
under my toque or not. But losing the eyebrows, and you really looked like a cancer patient. And that, I think, was the part I hated the most. But luckily it was by the 8th treatment, so it wasn't that bad. And then it was just a matter of recuperating. It was 2 or 3 months before the radiation started. And that I had to do in Victoria. You couldn't do it anywhere else.
Right.
And that was weekly. Again, once you started, you went every week. But that was painless. Luckily, I've kept what they call the little tattoos. When you go the first time, that's your longest time because they measure everything. And they actually give you I have these little dots. I think I have 3 of them.
Oh.
And that's where they lined up the radiation. Still see them. It's like a tattoo. I always kept it as a remembrance and a acknowledgement of kind of what I went through. Yeah.
So, I can hear you're somewhat of a practical person, Pam, in how you approach many things. And I love that you had that optimism, that you knew that this was going to be okay in the end. Your blog became a source of healing, perhaps, something to focus on and stay connected again. There's that word, with others. Looking back on that time in your life, was there anything else that you think helped during that time?
Well, family. I mean, people were reaching out, probably going through something like that. Like anything, I guess, is where you find out who your true friends are and the ones that'll be there for you. Some people I didn't hear from, I kind of almost thought it must have triggered something for them. So I think some people that may have had a history of cancer in their family or lost other people. I know an uncle of mine reached out, and surprising the people that do reach out that you don't think would, that took the time and the energy to want to reach out and connect. One of my uncles was one of those. And I was surprised because he was always kind of withdrawn. And he called and he was just really concerned, and I could hear it in his voice. And then I had forgotten that he had lost his mother to breast cancer, which at a young age. So sounded like she would have been in her 50s, early 50s, or maybe 40s. So he was just totally concerned and wanted to know how things were going and take care of yourself. And I was like, oh, wow, I expect to hear from Glenn. And other people I'd worked with years ago that, I hadn't seen in a long time, heard the news, and partially through the blog, like I said to anyone who I identified specific people that I knew wanted it and said, whoever else you think you would want to. And I remember this one woman, Marianne, who was also since passed, reached out and wanted to stop by and brought me a hat and just sharing, And so I think it's also important for people as an opportunity to open up and be honest, right? But yeah, I am practical, I guess, in that sense. And so for me, I just found, what do I need to do and how am I going to get through this? And like I said, I said to Clarence, I'm not going to die from this. I just felt that. I just knew that for whatever reason.
Which is lovely. You often hear that one's attitude or the perspective that you maintain can also make a difference in getting you through it, navigating it, and remaining optimistic. So that sounds like that might have been another part of your secret sauce that helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had aunts and cousins from Vancouver and Courtney that wanted to arrange a lunch where they brought everything and kind of just came to the house. And I think that was where the family really accepted and appreciated Clarence. We've been together a long time, but he was very protective. They kind of respected that and went through him and said, we'd like to do this and we'll just come and have lunch. And so there was like about 5 of them that, made the journey and came over and just kind of took over the kitchen. And, we sat and I'm not sure how much I ate, but there was food there.
Yes.
It was, I think, after the chemo and in between the radiation. So I wasn't as immune compromised. So, but again, kind of that pre-COVID era, everyone was still very careful and what you needed to do. And the other piece I had was one of our neighbors had put my name in, and there's a group of women that make quilt blankets.
Yes.
And I received this beautiful blanket in the mail that was, and it's huge. It's beautiful.
Wow.
And our neighbor's wife, she had submitted my name. She's a bit of a sewer, I think, and she's made one herself as part of what they do. So I'm just like, there's people doing amazing things for people that are going through cancer. So,
well, and what stands out for me is the importance not only for you feeling loved and thought of in all of those ways you've mentioned, but also it gives people something to do to help, a purpose and a meaningful kind of way of contributing. When we feel helpless and somebody we care about is struggling with their health, we want to do something. And yet what that could look like, the person may not know what help might look like, but offering up food or offering to put your name in a hat for a quilt. These are all ways that just people are expressing their love for you, their thoughtfulness of you, and sending you good energy for your wellness journey.
Yeah. And I think that's what the blog allowed as well, right? A way for people to reach out and still stay connected.
Yeah. Boy, that connection word is a theme, girl. I love it. I love it. Well, Pam, as we prepare to wrap up today, I just want to thank you again for being willing to share a story that is a good story and yet has so much depth and so much meaning to it in not only the way that your adoptive parents embraced you and helped you feel like one of their own from day one, but also the way in which you then became connected to your biological family and continue to maintain a connection with those folks. Thank you for sharing your vulnerability around your treatment of cancer and the journey that you've been on there.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking, and I'm honored to be part of your podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure. And, each person has a personal story, and it means so much to me that you are on here with us today. For many of us, we may take for granted the excitement our parents might have experienced when we were born. I love how Pam's adoptive parents placed a great deal of emphasis, not only on how excited they were in bringing her home, but how enthusiastic the whole community of Powell River was. Fast forward to meeting her biological mother and some of her biological siblings, it seems there was a second celebration of her coming home just to meet her biological family. Not all Indigenous adoptees may have had this experience that Pam did. Capturing Pam's sense of belonging in her adoptive family speaks to the value of identifying with this particular group of individuals as her own. In later getting to know her biological roots and Indigenous heritage, Pam's sense of belonging was then extended to a larger community. This made me think about what it means to be part of a family or to have a sense of belonging. I found this quote that suggested belonging is a sense of fitting in or feeling like you are an important member of a group. Many of you may have a positive experience when you think of the word family, but for some, this may not be the case. You can hear in Pam's story the gratitude and love she felt for her adoptive parents, but also the gift in having met some of her biological family. In sharing her story, she has had an opportunity to celebrate the big, beautiful community of individuals who have embraced her while sharing the culture and heritage of her nation through stories. As in many stories of resilience, Pam has highlighted the benefit of community and connection in providing a strong foundation for her as she grew and as an adult when she was recovering from breast cancer. In writing her blog, Pam was able to provide insight into her journey, share moments and memories with her community of family and friends. Even in some of the hardest moments, it was as if she was tethered to a beautiful group of people who love and care for her. At a time when she could have felt set adrift within the treatments and isolation, her writing became a bit of an anchor. As you reflect on this conversation with Pam, I invite you to spend a few moments to consider the ways that you feel connected to your family, friends, or community. What are the elements that give you a sense of belonging? What helps you feel anchored, secure, and safe? Thank you for listening to this episode of A Resilience Project. We would not be doing this podcast without you. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story or is helping to build resilience in their community, please email me at cindy@aresilienceproject.com. In fact, email me either way. I would love to hear from you. Also, check out my website, aresilienceproject.com, to meet the amazing people who have joined me on these podcasts. Last but not least, a big thank you to Doris Media House for their editing support. As you go about your week, I invite you to think about one way you can continue to grow your resilience muscle. What is one thing you can start doing today? See you next week.
Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca